Choose life. Choose a job. Choose a career. Choose a family. Choose a fucking big television. Choose washing machines, cars, compact disc players, and electrical cylinders. Choose a podcast. Choose the Untitled Film Podcast. Hello and welcome to another bonus episode of the Untitled Film Podcast. This is going to be another commentary track. I've already recorded this once, but thanks to the wonders or the lack thereof of a certain piece of software that's supposed to make my audio sound better, it garbled pretty much everything after the first 5 minutes. So it's been a few weeks since I've watched this movie. I just wanted to put a bit of time between the first unsuccessful recording and this recording that I'm going to be doing tonight. Okay, so this is going to be for the 2000 movie Unbreakable. One of my personal favourite films, directed by M. Night Shayamalan. And the main reason I'm doing this is because a couple of weeks ago, the movie Glass, which is a kind of sequel to this film and also a sequel to, it was kind of a surprise sequel to Unbreakable, which was Split, which was released a couple of years ago with James McAvoy. Didn't really tip its hat that it was a sequel to Unbreakable until literally the last 10 seconds of the movie, unless you knew your musical cues, and even then it only gave you like the last 40 seconds of the movie. But yes, so I'm going to be going through Unbreakable once again, and if you would like to follow the movie along with me, if you want to cue your disc up, I have got the Touchstone logo on the screen, and I'm going to be setting it off in 3, 2, 1, let's go. Okay, so this was the first M. Night Shyamalan film that I saw. I hadn't seen Sixth Sense, which came out in 1999. I think it was the year before, without Googling it. We've got the opening introduction to the film there. 35 pages and 124 illustrations in the average comic book. Single issue ranges from $1 to 140,000. 172,000 comics are sold in the US every day. That's just faded off the screen now, guys. And we can hear a baby crying now, for anyone who's still syncing up. So one of the very first things that you'll notice about this film is the use of sound and music, or the lack of music, more importantly. And it grounds the movie in just kind of a very real way. And for those of you who are keeping a sharp eye out here, you'll notice that this is Elijah Price, who was played, the baby anyway, is Elijah Price, who was played by Samuel L. Jackson when we cut to present time. And this is his mother. You'll notice that she's wearing purple. And the blanket that Elijah is covered in had a purple trimming around it. What's quite intriguing here is, as you'll find out in the film, Elijah is come to know, or he will become to known as Mr. Glass, and his introduction in this movie is literally the doctor here who is checking on Elijah, who has broken bones after being born. He's talking to the department store clerks in the mirror. via the glass. And that's obviously a recurring theme, along with the colour purple. The symbolism of glass, that's obviously an ongoing motif for his character throughout the course of the film. You will pick that up as we go along. I'll try and point out a few instances of that as well. I love the music to this film. It's one of the all-time overlooked soundtracks to a movie. But I think the movie in general was kind of overlooked as well. I mean, obviously it came out in the shadow of The Sixth Sense, which was a very successful film. And in musical terms, it's the difficult second album. But I actually think this is Shyamalan's best film. Easily his best film. So here we're introduced to Bruce Willis's character, David Dunn. And you get a real sense for his character in this opening kind of introduction here. He's weary, he's tired, there's a sadness. And as you'll find out in a moment, he's also a little bit of a dick. Again, Shyamalan's kind of playing with the camera. That's what I love about this film. It's kind of like the use of the camera. Obviously, he's just established that David just looked and smiled at a young girl who's sat in the seats in front of him here. And the camera is positioned in between the seats here, as if it's the little girl observing this interaction between David and this lady here. So yeah, David's a little bit of a dick, because obviously he's married, as you just saw. He took his wedding ring off so he could flirt with this lady here. I remember Shyamalan was in an interview, and he was asked about this opening scene and kind of the placement of the camera, and he said that he always envisioned it when he was making the movie, that this little girl could sense that there was something special about David. She could essentially see that he was a superhero, and she was intrigued by him, and that's why she was so interested in keeping an eye on him, watching him like this. And then becomes, as this conversation goes on, the little girl gets disappointed in him because of, she's expecting him to be she can see something special about him as if he's a hero, but he acts in a very unheroic manner, chatting up this woman. Again, the use of sound here, you can hear the train is kind of speeding up. And the noise from the wheels on the tracks is getting louder and louder and louder. So here's the little girl kind of failing to understand and kind of disapproving of what just happened with David and that lady. And now David's going to put his head up against the glass and go to sleep. We got, obviously, the motif of glass, which will come back at the very end of the film, and you'll realise why his reflection or his head against the glass is kind of noticeable on the final revelation at the end of the movie. Again, you know something's going wrong here because you can hear the horn of the train. Things are getting rocky, and, you know, it's storytelling, just it's show, don't tell. And if anyone's ever been in an accident, you absolutely know, like, time slows down when you're in an accident. So we know something bad's happened there, but we don't see it because it's cut away. And this is very kind of, this is a trick that Gareth Edwards used in the 2015 Godzilla remake, and he got a lot of criticism for that. Whenever there was an action scene or, you know, a sequence involving something, you know, happening, he would cut away to an incidental scene and he would show the action through kind of like television reports, news reports, and things like that. And when I was rewatching this film the other week, that kind of struck me. Because essentially that's what Shyamalan's just done here. There you go. Show, don't tell. That was Spencer Treat Clark, who plays David's son. I was very surprised to see Spencer Treat Clark actually come back in the movie Glass, because I hadn't seen him for a long time. I'd seen him in Gladiator, the Ridley Scott movie, and obviously in Unbreakable, but he kind of dropped off the radar. For anyone interested, that, you know, is Doug Stamper, if anyone is a fan of House of Cards. And again, Shyamalan is playing with the camera here because in the foreground you've got another survivor from the train here, and the camera is kind of peering over this body here and kind of earwigging or eavesdropping on this conversation in a way. And again, the sound, you can hear the laboured breathing of the body, you can hear the heart rate monitor. It's very kind of, it's almost Hitchcockian how he kind of plays with his camera, and he frames things. And that's another thing he does with this movie. If you look at how David is framed, you've got the curtains there, you've got the body in the foreground. He's almost kind of like framed it in a square, and there's a lot of this kind of composition used throughout the course of the film, which is supposed to evoke comic book panels, how comic book panels are framed. Obviously, you see the blood as soon as the body starts bleeding out there and expiring. The camera pushes over it and moves towards David with the realization that he's the sole survivor. Again, the lack of music in this scene where the doctor's explaining that David's a sole survivor, he hasn't got a scratch on him, he hasn't got a broken bone, you know, he's completely unharmed from this horrific train crash where everyone else has died. The lack of music is almost deafening. It kind of underlines the tension and the seriousness of the scene. And here we're introduced to Robin Wright, who is David's wife. And you already know that because of the opening scene, we already know that this is a kind of fragile relationship, and the way that just look at the body language. You know, she goes in for a hug, and it's not really a tender hug or an emotional hug. It's just they seem to be going through the motions. You know that there's something wrong with these two. They're going through a tough time. The kid has to put the hands together. You already know this is a strained relationship through the opening scene. I mean, essentially, it's a broken marriage. Again, he's framed by the doorway, you know, almost as if it's a comic book panel. Same for her. Okay, so here we've got David finding a letter on the windscreen of his car, which is from Elijah. Just left on the glass, obviously, you know. His recurring motif. Okay, so again, just through what we see on the screen, we're being shown that David is a security guard. And as you'll find out as the story evolves, obviously, you know, his heroic persona, you know, comes to the fore. We find out that, you know, David is already like, you know, a protector in a way with his job. Once again, he's framed by a doorway here, so he's always kind of, you know, framed by something. If you'll notice, the football players here, one team are in purple shirts and the opposing team are in green shirts, alluding to the fact that there is, a game or a battle, if you will, going on between the colour purple and the colour green, which is interesting because in the same way that Elijah's colour is purple, David's colour is green, his character colour. He's always surrounded by green. He wears lots of green in his clothes. If only it was that easy to get a raise nowadays. I've never had a sick day in my life. So here we are having the first flashback to Elijah's upbringing. And we're in West Philadelphia, born and raised. But it's not the Fresh Prince. This is teenager Elijah. And again, we are introduced to him through a reflection in the TV screen, which obviously is made of glass. So, I mean, it sounds very obvious, and you kind of like, obviously you'll get the point when you see, how many kind of like times these kind of tricks are used, but it all goes towards kind of informing you about the character. And not only is Elijah introduced in the reflection of the TV screen, but again, if you look carefully, the TV screen itself is a frame in the same way that a comic book panel would be. That's the really nice thing about Elijah's mum in this. I mean, she believes in him all the way through. There's a real nice kind of connection and tenderness to their relationship. It feels kind of real. Again, we got the colour motif here for Elijah. The present is wrapped in purple. And it's just, again, I love the shot selection in this film, the way that Shyamalan chose to put the camera behind the park bench, making the present the kind of focus of that shot, rather than Elijah coming over towards it, because in many ways this present is the focus of this scene, because this is what is going to inform Elijah, his personality, and who he becomes. Receiving this present, his very first comic book, is obviously an important moment in his life, and it goes on to colour everything else that he does with his life, his quest for meaning. So there's just that kind of artistic choice to put the camera behind the bench and make the present the main focus. Really, really cleverly done. Again, it's just kind of like the simple stuff. The basics of filmmaking is usually you can have all the bells and whistles that you want, but when you're telling us, to tell a story and tell it well, you got to go back to the basics. Here we are again with another reflection now of an adult Elijah, Sam Jackson's first introduction here. And he's introduced in the reflection of the painting here. It kind of dates the film in a way, because Teletubbies aren't as big now as what they used to be. I think kids have moved on to Peppa Pigs here now. A little bit of Jules in this performance here. Just like Jaguaro has a misshapen and abnormally large head, if you notice Samuel L. Jackson's haircut in this film, it's not an accident. I remember it was a source of some kind of piss taking back in the day, oh, look at his fucking hair and all this kind of shit. But again, it is intentional. So again, we're looking through a pane of glass. Elijah is framed by the doorway. David's framed by the actual window frame. It's interesting that David doesn't want his kids to drink any more water, considering, as we'll find out, his weakness is water in this film. If you look as his son is walking out of the room here, David's head here is kind of framed with the desk lamp in front of it or behind it, depending on perspective. And it kind of looks like a halo. That was done on purpose, because David is, after all, a saviour. In the realm of the film, of course. If you look there, obviously, this is all clippings of David's former football team, the Warriors, meaning that when David was in the football team himself, he was in fact a warrior. And the mystery is slowly starting to unravel around David. What happened to him back in the day. Oh, that's a trap. That is a trap. Whenever they say that, that is a trap. So, I believe Julianne Moore was originally cast or offered the role of David's wife, Audrey, here. I believe she turned it down, as she was at the time starring in Hannibal as Clarice Starling. So we've got the two characters here, framed by green bars. I don't know if that's to reflect that David feels trapped in a way behind prison bars, or trapped by his life, or whatever it is. There's obviously something wrong with David. It's interesting that we never find out what started the problems between David and his wife. It's just that they're having problems. I personally think it's to do with David having this kind of hole inside him, not knowing his place. Because in the same way that Elijah is looking for affirmation or confirmation for his place in the world, David doesn't know what his place in the world is either. And it's not until the end of the movie, when Elijah finds that meaning, that David has his meaning confirmed. Well, I suppose a little bit before that, he kind of gets that, because you see his life starts to improve. Elijah's cane is made of glass. Again, another small detail informing his character. I believe that glass cane was Sam Jackson's own idea to have that. The interior here of Elijah's car, I mean, it's like a Bond villain's car, you know? Yeah. That sounds painful. So here we've got a nice little fun sequence of David and his kid. His kid's obviously, you know, drinking the Kool-Aid in relation to his dad being the superhero. Naughty boy. So now David's starting to get intrigued, which is accompanied by a musical cue. Oh, that'll give you piles. Uh, I love this because before when we had this over the lock-in shot, the camera was locked off, but now that David's actually realizing and kind of growing in his power, the camera goes down with the weight and up with the weight, whereas before it was just locked off. So when this film came out in 2000, like I say, I hadn't seen The Sixth Sense. This was the first Shyamalan film that I saw, and it was interesting because I knew nothing really about the film going into it, and the only kind of like thing that I knew, well, I didn't really know anything, but what made me aware of the film was every Thursday at the cinema we would get new promotional stuff for the upcoming films and put them on display. So we'd rotate posters out, we'd put standees up, which for anyone who doesn't know what a standee is, the big, when you go into a cinema now, if you see a big cardboard kind of cutout advertising a film, that's called a standee. Or we called them standees, but apparently the Americans called them standees. So we emphasize the D, standee, whereas the Americans, standees like candy kind of thing. Tomato, tomato. So yeah, I remember the box because those standees would come in like a flat pack box, and you would make them up like giant pieces of origami kind of thing, and that was my first kind of introduction to the film, and I was kind of intrigued by it. It was a Bruce Willis film, and I thought, yeah, we'll watch it. And at the end of every Thursday, once all the customers had gone out, and we'd changed the posters around and we'd cleaned everything down, because invariably the new movies would be coming out on the Friday. We would have like staff previews, because these were the days when films actually came on celluloid film. So we would make the films up, and to make sure that there was no imperfections or faults with the film, normally we would put on, a couple of films for the staff, and the staff would get to watch the films, and the projection guys could make sure that there was nothing wrong with the film before it was shown the next day, kind of thing. Although I'm not entirely sure what would happen if there was a problem with the film, because we never kind of, at least to my knowledge, while I was we never had that issue. So yeah, we watched this in screen number 1, which we had 12 screens at our cinema. Screens 1 and 12 were the biggest. And the way the cinema was laid out was kind of like, it was symmetrical. So screens 1 through 6 were on the left hand side as you entered, and screens 7 through 12 were on the right hand side, and there were complete mirrors of each other. If you were to cut it down, so screen 1 was mirrored by screen 12, screen 10 was mirrored by screen 1, 2, 3, screen 1, 2, 3, equal size, same amount of chairs, all that kind of stuff, and I remember watching this film because most people were bored by it. I loved it, but most people were bored by it. And the reason I know that a couple of the guys were bored by it was because there was a girl that worked there. I think she was called Rebecca. She had black hair. She had 2 different coloured eyes. She had like a green and a blue eye. Really pretty little thing. And she never used to stay for the films. But she stayed for this one for some reason, and she sat on the back row with me, and it wasn't like that. You're not going to get down and dirty with 10 or 12 of your work colleagues sat directly in front of you. But she was pretty cute, and she was kind of getting bored of the film, and kind of falling asleep, and she ended off like kind of nuzzling into me, cuddling into me, and falling asleep kind of thing. Took her shoes off, put her feet up on me, and just kind of like wrapped herself into me. She left a couple of weeks after that, actually. That's a shame, because she was pretty cute. But anyway. So here we've got a scene with David just kind of testing his powers kind of thing. He's starting to realise that his intuitions, as he explained them, is more than just a feeling. He kind of gets visions and stuff like that. And if you'll notice, whenever someone bumps into David and he gets one of these flashes of their kind of flashes of their life, they're all kind of very colourful characters which kind of stick out. And that would usually be done in comic books, if they wanted, if the artist wanted to highlight a character in a crowd, they would normally highlight them with a bright colour which contrasted against the actual background. Elijah is, meanwhile, quite insidiously quizzing David's wife, kind of getting into their life. See, again, the colours here are popping on the bad guys. So they must have desaturated the rest of the image to make the colour pop. This is M. Night Shyamalan's cameo in the movie as a drug dealer. And this character actually makes a bit of a comeback in Glass as well, which made zero sense to me whatsoever. The way he's kind of retrofitted this character to have a cameo in Glass was just like, ugh, come on. He really can't act to save his life, and arguably now he really can't direct either. But that's another thing. And here we have a moment of revelation for David. So essentially, what we've just learned there is David has a weakness. So his kid's kind of taking it to heart now. I mean, if you heard a conversation between two men, one of them was your dad, and the other guy was saying that your dad was, a superhero, you probably believe it, or want it to be real. And obviously, this kid really wants it to be real. So after David rejects him, obviously Elijah is dejected, as we find out here. That fat cunt doesn't need any more fucking chicken. So you can kind of tell that there's some kind of seething anger underneath the surface here with Elijah. Just the way that, he's passively aggressively fucking with this guy. I really hate this guy. He's an asshole. Fuck with him a bit more, Sam. Sentryman versus the Coalition. Obviously, that'll play a little bit of a part in Glass, if anyone's seen Glass, because essentially Elijah's seeing Sentryman as David, and David Sentryman there faces off against the Coalition. David essentially faces off against the Horde in the movie Glass, which is James McAvoy's character. And Prince likes his purple as well. So now that David is kind of beginning to accept his powers and not so much at this point his responsibility, but at very least his powers. You'll notice that obviously other aspects of his life is starting to get better, like the relationship with his wife here. Yeah, sweetheart, I didn't. Just put it away for you. Way to guilt trip him, love. And a little bit of thunder there to underline. Century Comics 117. If anyone was paying attention, you will know that the train that crashed at the beginning that David was on was the East Rail 117. Bit of foreshadowing there, guys. So here we have the hero coming to the full realization of what's going on. If you'll notice, like every scene where it's been raining, David's got his raincoat on. It's literally his protection against the rain. Obviously, I mean, I know it's a raincoat, but, you know, just scratch a little bit deeper on the surface. He wears the raincoat to protect him from the rain, which turns out water is his kryptonite. And obviously it doubles as his cape, or his costume, if you will, because becomes known as the Overseer in Glass. That's the nickname that's given to him. Bit of a lame one, but... David's like realizing the magnitude of the crash here and realizing he had no right to survive it. And along with everything else that he's come to rediscover about himself. It triggers this flashback here that we see back to the night with the car crash that we saw in the clippings where he got injured. Obviously, he's got his Warriors jacket on there. You know, all the connotations that go with being a warrior, a protector. You know, he's obviously a hero, and this is the first time that we actually see him being heroic by saving Audrey, ripping the car to pieces as if it was just tin. That guy looks zero. He has no kind of likeness to Bruce Willis. They should have got Joseph Gordon-Levitt in there and did what they did with Looper. But I suppose that predated this film by a good 15 years or something. When was Looper? Was it 2015? $2012, Jesus. So this is essentially the acceptance of David and we get the full kind of musical theme come in here. Obviously slow building. Again, everyone that kind of pings on David's spider sense, for lack of a better term, they're all, if you notice, in kind of like vivid colours against very muted and grey background. Where he's kind of like raising his hands out. It's kind of like, I don't know. Almost like religious, crucifixion. Ah, this is icky. Very, very icky. So we've gone from GBH or assault up to rape, and now we're going to murder and kidnap. So that's one hell of an escalation, I suppose. And this is the one that David decides to act on. I'm assuming it's because of this scream that he heard then. He acts on this one because as part of his vision he knows that there's someone to be saved. The family of the guy that was just murdered there on the stairs. And let's face it, the assault's already happened with the guy getting bottled, and the rape's already happened, with the kid. So there's not a whole lot he would be able to do there, I guess. Ring the police. Oh, this young boy raped a girl, date raped, drugged her and raped her. What proof have you got, Mr. Dunn? Had a vision. Whereas with this guy, you can obviously follow him back, tail him back to the scene of the crime and stop him. And that class is a jump scare, kind of. Is it loud enough for a jump scare? again, the lack of music and just the sound. Knowing that David is in the house with this guy, it ramps up the tension in a kind of cat and mouse kind of way. So here we go. David's kind of like snapping into action now. He obviously knows what he's here to do, kind of thing. So David here is gesturing to the woman tied up on the radiator to be quiet, but I mean, if you look, it's obvious that she's already dead. She's not moving, her head's tilted over, it's just the fact that she's tied up by the hands to the radiator that's keeping her propped up there. Again, just really clever camera work. Having the camera, show David's tumbling point of view. And this is absolutely horrific. Just the thought of this, falling into a pool and getting trapped in the actual pool cover. So claustrophobic, It wouldn't be a pleasant way to go. I mean, even if you were unbreakable or not, it would not be if water wasn't your kryptonite, it wouldn't be a pleasant way to go. It is interesting, actually, now that I think about it, that with this and the film that came after this, Signs, Shyamalan's next film, it is interesting that the weakness shared between the angels or the aliens or the demons, depending on how you view that film, and David is a weakness of water, because it's water that is essentially the aliens' undoing in Signs. So through David saving the kids, that has spurred them on in turn to actually come and rescue David from the pool. And because of that, obviously him having a positive effect, an inspiring effect, like a true hero, we had that triumphant swell of the music there, which is really nice. This is just weird, man. How he's just kind of like spitting the beer on her. Kind of looks like she could be alive there, just with the dithering of the camera, but she's clearly already dead. And here we have the kind of moment where everything comes together. David's vanquishing evil. You've got a kind of... It's not... Well, it's kind of like triumphant in a way, the way the music is, but it's also kind of tinged with melancholy and tragedy in a way, because obviously he wasn't able to save everyone. It's all done from kind of like a God's eye perspective, with the camera being above in the room, and it didn't cut away or didn't move. The camera just followed the action. So with that kind of horn, echoing the musical theme, it's almost like a call to action kind of thing. And now that David has fully embraced his role and kind of, remembered his past, he's not broken anymore, because when we met him and he was thinking about kind of cheating with that woman on the train, he obviously was in a broken marriage, he was a broken man. There was a deep sadness in there, because he didn't know his place in the world. At least that's how I interpreted it. And obviously after this, he's saved a couple of lives. He's made an impact on the world. The first thing he does is go up and sweeps his wife up, takes her upstairs into his own bed, and I'm assuming he's gonna, give her a good night. Maybe. Or just cuddle. So obviously the title of the film is Unbreakable, and, in very simple terms, when we first meet David, he's broken in more ways than one. Broken marriage, broken man. And now he's not. As she says, it's over now. So here we go. He seems happy now. She seems happy. They're holding hands, kind of, and open body language now, as opposed to closed body language right at the start, where they met in the hospital. They're leaning together, they're talking, smiling at each other. Everything's shifted now. Considering there's not much dialogue in this scene, this is like the emotional heart of the scene, between father and son, because, like, I haven't really touched on it, but like I mentioned before, the kid hearing that his dad's a superhero, and he desperately wants it to believe that it's true, because every kid wants to, believe that their dad's a superhero, and, to the point where he holds a gun at his dad, and he desperately wants it to be true, so much so that I'm willing to shoot you. And for David just to share this moment with him quietly, just to say, it's all true, you were right. It's just a really sweet, touching moment between father and son. I mean, look at that shot there where he just looks up from the paper. It's just kind of like, really, Dad, kind of thing. It's just so well acted. Really nice scene. Really, really nice scene. So now that David's fessed up to his son, he's obviously going to go and kind of give Elijah that kind of reassurance that he needs, that he's been looking for. Yes, they do. She's really good. She has that kind of motherly warmth to her, even though it's weird that the actress playing Charlene Woodward, she's actually 5 years younger than Sam Jackson, and do you know what? When I was watching Glass, because she returns as Elijah's mother in Glass, to age her up, for the 20 years that have passed between this film and Glass, it is some of the worst prosthetics I have seen. And I don't know if that's because she is a black lady or what, if it's harder to actually get the skin tone right, but especially around the mouth, the prosthetics were horrendous. I thought, is that a burn prosthetic at some point? It was absolutely horrific. I think they should have just done what they did with this film and just kind of grey her hair up a little bit, because it doesn't matter if she looks old. The fact is she has that kind of... She plays it so well, his mother. She plays it with a real warmth and a real kind of wisdom. And that belies her real age, so... that really dragged me out of the film when I was watching Glass. But she's really good in this. And she's, to be fair, she's good in Glass, but she's just having to fight her way through a bit of fucking terrible prosthetics in that film. And you will notice that Elijah is pretty much the only source of colour in these scenes now. And if you hadn't worked it out already, this makes it painfully obvious that the plane explosion, the apartment building fire, and the train crash that we saw right at the beginning of the film, Elijah is responsible for all of those. And David is, obviously, mortified by that. Not just that kind of reaction there, it's always struck me as kind of like a real reaction. I think Bruce really knocked it out of the park with his understated kind of acting in this film. He really found a kind of like grounded performance in this film. Okay, so here we have the tragic musical cue. So here we've got the Law and Order ending, I suppose. I know the film got a little bit of stick for how it ended with, like, the title cards there saying David led the police to limited edition, and now Elijah Price is in an institution for the criminally insane, blah, 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 blah. But I don't personally have an issue with the ending because, the journey up until this point has been so well crafted and so kind of precise that I can't think of another way that they could have ended that film with, I think the way that David turns his back on Elijah and just walks away from him is kind of perfect in its own way. And, from Elijah's point of view, it is kind of, it is a kind of tragic tale for him because I can completely empathize with how he feels about, not knowing what his place in the world is, because it is something that I think everyone at some point in their life, I mean, I've certainly kind of grappled with it, and I'm sure, it's something that everyone at some point in their life will actually go through, where you will actually question, your place in the world, and more than that, you'll kind of question what kind of legacy you're going to leave behind. At least I have. It's kind of like I've got to an age where for the last couple of years it's kind of really bugged me as to, my life hasn't gone the way that I wanted it to. Things haven't worked out the way that, I hoped they would. I've had, my own fair share of tragedy and kind of loss and regret and, sadness and things like that. And you get to a certain point where you do begin to question, was I a mistake? Have I contributed anything positive to the world? Is anyone going to remember me when I'm gone? If I was to end it tomorrow, would anyone miss me? And, those kind of questions can kind of really keep you awake at night. And Elijah is he's outside the bell curve with that. He's on the extreme end of that, to the point where he goes seeking his own validation, and he does it in the most kind of terrible ways possible, by causing scores of deaths, hundreds of deaths, in order to find his opposite. And it's real powerful kind of like stuff if you sit down and think about it. His motivation at least. So there's a real weight and a real tragedy there for me, because I can completely kind of get where he's coming from with that. Not that I would ever go and kind of like, plant a bomb on a train or a plane or burn an apartment building down, but it makes him a real character, the fact that you can understand his reasons behind, doing these terrible things that he does. Yeah. For me, this is absolutely Shyamalan's greatest film. The Sixth Sense, I saw it after, and I was already aware of the ending, because, everyone was talking about it, and that did kind of lessen the effect, although there's still a lot that I enjoyed about The Sixth Sense, especially with the camera work and the use of colour and all this kind of thing, which he kind of ramped up to 11 in this one. And I'm a massive fan of Signs as well. I think Signs is kind of like a very close, second to Unbreakable. So for me, the order of greatness in his films would be Unbreakable first, Signs a very, very close second, and Sixth Sense a third, and then everything else afterwards, you could be forgiven for giving them a miss. But yeah, that is Unbreakable. Some of my thoughts on it. I hope you enjoyed listening to me watch the movie. I hope you enjoyed accompanying me through what I think is, an often overlooked masterpiece. I really do believe that this film is a masterpiece of, modern film, and I will defend it to the day I die because it's just a great film. I apologise that this commentary didn't come out when I said it was going to come out. That is because of the issues that I had, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast. Next up, I will be doing the commentary for Split because I did say I would work my way through, and then eventually I'll get around to discussing Glass and giving you my thoughts on that terrible letdown. But yeah, thank you very much for listening to this, and just want to say thank you ever so much to anyone who has taken the time to listen to one of my podcasts. It has meant a great deal over these past few months, and I am sincerely grateful. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, you can email us at untitledfilmpod@gmail.com. If you want to get in touch on Instagram, it's the Untitled Film Podcast. You can find us on Facebook. We've got a Facebook group, and we also have a Patreon. If anyone would like to support the podcast, if you enjoy the content, then head on over to the Patreon. There's a few different tiers that you can subscribe to there, and some of the tiers do have some goodies along with them. And that's enough for me rambling on this fine Saturday night. I really have no life. I've literally recorded a podcast on a Saturday night, so no friends, no life, but, movies get me through. Okay, thanks again, guys, and until the next one, I hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Much love.